The morning my son-in-law changed my house locks, I stood on the porch holding groceries in disbelief. My own key turned useless in my hand. I didn't cry. I called my lawyer. By sunset, my daughter-in-law's clothes were folded neatly on the lawn, and that was only the beginning. The sun was sliding behind the bare oaks when I turned off Hawthorne Drive. That stretch of road had been home for 40 years, long enough that every porch light, every mailbox felt like part of my own story. I'd just come back from a quiet weekend with Margot, hoping to shake off a week of doctor's appointments and dull headlines. My knees ached from the drive, and the last thing I wanted was trouble. I pictured the same simple comfort I'd earned: my slippers by the heater, a pot of leftover stew, the hum of the house that had carried my laughter and grief since Harold died. Traffic on I-264 had been rough, and I chuckled, thinking how I always say I'll never drive that route again. The winter air bit at my face as I stepped out, the faint smell of salt from the bay reminding me why I never moved inland. I caught myself humming as I reached into my purse for the old brass key, the one that had fit that front door since the Reagan years. That house wasn't just brick and wood. It was proof that hard work pays off, that a black couple could build something that no one could take away. Or so I thought. The porch light clicked on, just like always. I smiled at the faded mat that said, "Bless this home," though the B was half gone. I slipped the key in and turned. It stopped halfway. I frowned, jiggled it, tried again. Nothing. My hand was steady, but the metal refused to move. "Come on now," I whispered, giving the knob a sharp twist. "Don't you start acting brand new." The sound was different, clean, crisp. That's when I saw it. A fresh silver lock gleaming where the old brass one used to be, and a tiny sticker with a locksmith's phone number. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Someone had changed it when time. Someone had locked me out of my own house. I stood there for a long moment, Fawad, gripping that useless key like a weapon I no longer knew how to use. The neighbors' curtains glowed across the street. I could almost feel eyes behind them, watching but pretending not to. Pride kept me from knocking. I wasn't about to give anyone a show. Then came the faint pulse of music from inside. It was soft at first, some upbeat R&B track Vivica liked to blast when she cooked. My stomach turned. I stepped off the porch and noticed the cars. A silver crossover I didn't recognize, a rental with out-of-state plates, and another pulling away. Probably a rideshare. Through the crack in the curtains, I caught flashes, shapes moving, the glint of glasses, the kind of laughter that fills a room where people feel safe. Safe, because they didn't think I'd be coming home. I pressed the doorbell once, then again. The chime echoed faintly under the music, but nobody came. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, and called Colby, straight to voicemail. "Colby," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "It's Mom. I'm standing outside my house, and my key doesn't work. Call me back." I ended the call, looked at the glowing windows, and slipped the phone back into my coat. If anyone was watching, they'd just see an older woman checking her car, not a mother shut out of her life. I sat behind the wheel, engine off, fingers cold on the phone. Out of habit, I opened Facebook. The first thing that popped up was a video, Vivica's page, champagne glasses clinking, the camera panning across my kitchen, my backsplash, my cookie jar, my life. The caption read, "New chapter, fresh start in our home." My breath came shallow. Comments scrolled by, friends cheering her on, not a single word about me. I stared at the screen, my reflection hovering over their smiles. "They didn't just change the locks," I murmured. "They rewrote the story." The humiliation burned hot, but under it something steadier began to form. I wasn't about to cry on my own street. I slipped the car into gear, whispering, "All right, Vivica, I see how you want to play this." As I drove away, I didn't look back at the house until the corner. The porch light glowed like an eye that no longer recognized me. I felt my pride settle over me like armor. Tonight, I'd sleep at Margot's. Tomorrow, I'd start thinking they'd made their move. Now it was my turn. I kept the car steady as I pulled away. the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, its porch light cutting through the dark like it was watching me leave. My knuckles tightened around the steering wheel, but I told myself, "You're not running, Mireille, you're regrouping." I passed the familiar 7-Eleven, the empty church parking lot, the neon closed sign at the laundromat. Every turn reminded me how long I'd known these streets. 40 years of groceries, gas, and Sunday mornings. I thought about calling the police, but stopped. I'd seen too many stories of women like me turned into headlines for the wrong reasons. "No, not tonight," I murmured. "They'd make it look like I lost my mind." So I kept driving, the heater humming low, the humiliation sitting just under my ribs. I checked into a small roadside motel, paid in cash, and told the clerk I'd only stay one night. This wasn't retreat, it was strategy. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, my knees ached, and my back felt like it had been folded overnight. I made the motel coffee, burnt and bitter, but drank it anyway. Sleep hadn't fixed a thing, it had only sharpened it. "You can't fix betrayal with rest," I muttered. I took my blood pressure pills, clicked the TV on for noise, and tried Colby again. Straight to voicemail. "Colby," I said evenly, "this isn't a misunderstanding. We need to talk about that lock." The silence afterward felt heavier than any response could. When Margot called, her voice came loud and fierce. "Want me to drive over there? Raise some hell?" I sighed. "Not yet. I don't need fireworks. I need proof." After hanging up, I grabbed my coat. Groceries would steady me. Normal things had power. Routine could stitch the edges of a shaken heart. Bay Market smelled the same. Citrus and cold air. The automatic doors whooshed open, and I was greeted by the familiar hum of shopping carts and distant chatter. The young cashier, Emily, smiled from her lane. "Morning, Miss Mireille," I smiled back. "Morning, sweetheart, how's your mama?" "Still fussing about the cold," she laughed. I picked up coffee, a few greens, some chicken thighs, things that said stability. My hands trembled just slightly as I swiped my loyalty card. The little screen blinked, and then my stomach dropped. The name that appeared wasn't mine. Vivica St. James. At first, I thought my eyes were tired. "That's not my name," I said gently, pointing. Emily leaned in, frowning. "Huh. System must have updated. I can't change it from here. Ma'am?" My smile felt stiff. "Could I see the receipt?" She tore it off, handed it to me. There it was, printed in black and white. Customer Vivica St. James. My chest tightened. Not rage, something colder, like realization settling in. "Somebody called last week," Emily added. "Said they were updating the rewards account tied to your address." I nodded, pretending calm. Of course they did. Driving back to the motel, I held that receipt on the passenger seat like it was evidence, because they hadn't just changed the lock, they were rewriting my life, line by line, number by number. What I didn't know yet, and would only learn weeks later, was how deep it went. Deacon Holloway, the locksmith, told me the story after all this was over. He'd worked on my house for years, fixed a jammed hinge for Harold back in '98. When Vivica called, she'd smiled at him, told him she and her husband were settling in. She asked for a clean slate, her words sugar-coated but sharp. As he packed up his tools, she said, casual as daylight, "Just a razor from everything. It's simpler that way." He didn't know who her was until he saw my picture on the mantel, still sitting there when he left. That sentence, a razor, stuck in his head long after he cashed the check. I sat at the motel table, the receipt beside my phone, keys and wallet. 3 small things had turned into proof of a pattern. The lock, the party, the name. One mistake's an accident, I whispered. 3 in a row is intent. I looked at Harold's photo in my wallet. They're not just moving me out, baby. They're deleting me. I called Colby one last time. "If I don't hear from you by tonight," I said, "I'll take it as a decision, and I'll respond like it's one." My voice didn't shake. Before bed, I opened my contacts list. My finger hovered over a name I hadn't called since Harold's funeral, Nolan Pierce, our old lawyer. I let my hand fall. Not yet, but soon. You want to erase me on paper? Paper works both ways. The grocery receipt sat beside my coffee cup, edges curling slightly from the steam. My phone screen glowed with Nolan Pierre's number, but I didn't press it yet. I needed one more truth before I brought anyone else into this. Feelings are one thing, I told myself. Facts are another. I wasn't going back to that house to cause a scene. I just needed to see it. Daylight would make it real. I brushed my hair, zipped my coat, tied my scarf neat. No wild eyes, no tears. I knew how easily an older black woman's anger could be twisted into disturbing the peace. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and nodded. You're not crazy. You're collecting evidence. As I drove toward Hawthorne Drive, I repeated a new mantra under my breath. If they're erasing me, I want to see the eraser marks. I parked a few houses down, pretending to admire the camellias blooming early along the sidewalk. The house looked the same but wrong, like a photograph that's been slightly retouched. The porch furniture was rearranged, the curtains drawn tighter. Even the sound of the wind felt foreign. I walked past slowly, eyes scanning the windows. Through the living room glass, I caught sight of new throw pillows, a lamp I didn't recognize, and then my heart stopped. The wall. The photo wall that had once told my family's story was stripped bare. The faint outlines of frames still lingered like ghosts. Tiny nail holes, a darker square where our wedding picture used to hang. They didn't redecorate, I whispered. They deleted. The pain wasn't loud. It was clean, surgical. A single, framed quote now hung in place of everything we'd built. New beginnings take courage. I turned away before my face betrayed what I felt. They could change the pictures, but they couldn't change what those walls had seen. Back at Margot's, I asked if I could go through the old shoebox I'd brought along when I moved some things out before Colby and Vivica took over. Inside were tax forms, Jack's death certificate, and a few handwritten notes in his blocky script. Near the bottom, taped inside a yellowed envelope, was a small brass key. My breath caught. Jack's handwriting across the front read, Safe Deposit, Hawthorne Branch, House Papers. I could almost hear him saying, if anything ever happens, Nell, you go to that box. Don't you let anyone talk circles around you. For years, I'd brushed it off as Jack's over-preparation. Now, it felt like a message sent forward in time. I smiled faintly. You really thought ahead, didn't you? My hands didn't shake. My spine straightened. Before sundown, I was going to that bank. No warning, no asking permission, and they'd erased enough for 1 week. The Hawthorne Bank branch was calm and cold inside, smelling faintly of lemon polish and printer ink. Mrs. Reynolds, the teller, recognized me immediately. Afternoon, Miss Dane. Her voice alone steadied me. I need access to my safe deposit box, I said, placing the key on the counter. She checked her monitor, nodded, and handed me a small clipboard. You're all set, ma'am. The signature line read, Mireille Dane. My name. Clear. Unchanged. Inside the private room, I turned the key and lifted the box lid. Inside were the original house deed, the mortgage payoff letter, and a notarized copy of Jack's will naming me sole owner. The dates were current, the ink sharp. No transfer, no sale. Just truth written in black and white. Paper doesn't lie, I murmured. It doesn't care who throws parties in your kitchen. It cares who owns the ground they're standing on. Outside, the sky had turned overcast. I walked to my car with the envelope pressed against my chest. Inside were copies of everything. The deed, the payoff, the will. Proof of a life earned. I laid them next to the grocery receipt on the passenger seat. 2 sheets of paper. 2 worlds colliding. I whispered, You can move my pictures. You can change a lock. But my name on that deed, that's not fashion. That's the law. I scrolled past Colby's name on my phone and tapped Nolan Pierre's number instead. The line rang twice before a calm voice answered. Pierre and Associates? I drew a breath, steady and deliberate. Hi, Nolan, I said, voice even but edged with steel. This is Mireille Dane. I think somebody's trying to steal my house. Nolan's office had answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, firm, the kind of tone that doesn't rush, doesn't flatter, just gets to work. Keep everything, Miss Dane, he'd said. Screenshots, letters, texts. Think like you're building a file, not fighting a family argument. When I hung up, I didn't feel rescued. I felt restored. Finally. Someone treated me like a client, not an aging inconvenience. Back at Margot's kitchen table, I poured a cup of coffee and opened my phone. Vivica's "Fresh Start in Our Home" post glowed on the screen, the same one that had made my stomach turn days ago. This time, I wasn't watching it as a victim. I was reviewing it as evidence, Nolan had warned. Don't engage emotionally online, but silence. I'd learned. It's a form of surrender. I didn't want to fight. I wanted truth to stand where lies were lounging, I told myself. Just one sentence. Clear and clean. The post looked smug even in daylight, champagne glasses clinking in my kitchen, the caption dripping with new beginning sweetness. I scrolled through the parade of comments. So proud of you two. What a lovely home. Blessings on your next chapter. Each word landed like grit under my eyelid. My cursor hovered over the comment box, and my fingers didn't shake. I typed, "Looks like everybody's having a good time in the house Jack and I paid off 40 years ago. Just a reminder, the deed still has my name on it. Mireille Dane." Then I hit post. No double-checking, no breath-holding. Within seconds, the seen-by count began to climb. A few of my church friends liked it immediately. Someone dropped a simple. Another asked, "Wait, what?" My phone buzzed with private messages. "You okay, Miss Dane? Call if you need anything." I almost deleted it out of habit. Women like me are trained to smooth things over, but I stopped. "No," I said softly. "They change locks in secret. The least I can do is tell the truth in daylight." An hour later, the counterstrike came. Vivica posted a story. Pastel background, cursive font. It's sad when people can't accept change and want to drag you down with their drama. No names, but she didn't need to. I'd seen this trick before. Play the victim. Twist the knife politely. The comments poured in. Half sympathy, half suspicion. Margot, reading over my shoulder, shook her head. "You didn't say one thing wrong. Nell, that was grown woman truth. Don't walk it back." My phone pinged again. A neighbor sent a screenshot of a group chat. "She's confused." Someone wrote. Another replied. "But isn't that still her house?" I felt the old ache of being dismissed. "When you're an older black woman," I said quietly, "folks don't argue your facts. They argue your sanity." Margot leaned forward. "Then make them choke on facts." I smiled. Working on it. That evening, my phone rang. Vivica's name lit the screen like a warning light. I let it buzz twice before answering on speaker. "Hey, Mireille," she started, syrupy sweet. "I saw your comment. See, I think this is all just a misunderstanding. You didn't have to go public like that." I kept my tone even. "The misunderstanding started when my key stopped working." A pause. Then came the spin. "We thought you wanted more space. Colby said maybe you were looking into senior communities. We just wanted a fresh start for everyone." I almost laughed. "Changing locks isn't fresh. It's illegal. Throwing a party in my kitchen isn't a start. It's trespassing." She sighed dramatically. "You're being emotional. I think you misremember." "No," I cut in, calm and cold. "I remember perfectly. What you don't know is what's written at the bank." Silence stretched. I ended it neatly. "Next time we talk, Vivica, it'll be with my lawyer on the line." Then I pressed end for a long minute. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Margot finally spoke. "You handled that like a queen. You know that?" I smiled faintly, pulling my laptop closer. I took screenshots of everything. The posts, her story, the call log. I printed them, labeled each. Evidence house. The folder grew heavier, like armor. "In this country," I said, sealing the envelope, "people respect paper and panic at lawyers. I've avoided both too long." I reached for my calendar, circled Thursday, my first official meeting with Nolan. "They think this is family drama," I murmured. "They're about to find out it's a case." When Thursday came, I walked into Nolan's office carrying my house evidence folder, like armor. I wasn't there as some heartbroken mother. I was a client ready to get things done. The place smelled faintly of toner and lemon polish. Framed degrees lined the walls, and a soft hum came from a copier behind the glass partition. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Miss Dane. Can I get you some water?" The sound of my last name, said with respect, not pity, steadied me. Nolan came out a minute later, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, wanting that sharp, alert look lawyers get when they smell a real case. "Let's see what we're working with," he said. I laid everything out on his desk. The deed, the Bay Market receipt, screenshots of the Fresh Start post, my notes on the locks. He took them seriously, jotting down details as I spoke, for once. Someone wasn't humoring me. He was listening like it mattered. In this country, I told him, half to myself, the person with the best folder usually wins. Took me 68 years to learn that. After 20 minutes of reviewing, Nolan looked up. "The house is still legally yours. Full stop." He turned his laptop toward me, showing a flagged notice from the bank's title department. "But this is new," he said. "Someone tried to open paperwork to use your property as collateral. Looks like a home equity line, with Colby and Vivica listed as the applicants." My chest tightened. "Using my house? They couldn't finish it," Nolan continued. "The bank couldn't verify ownership. Your name didn't match theirs, so it stalled. But it means they've already tested the waters." I sat back, my jaw set. "So they weren't just redecorating," I said quietly. "They were getting ready to cash out the roof over my head." Nolan's tone hardened. "Miss Dane, this isn't family drama anymore. It's financial manipulation. You need to lock it down. Now." He outlined next steps. A cease and desist letter, legal notice to the bank, and documents verifying my mental and financial capacity to prevent any guardianship claims. "If they're playing paper games," I said, signing his forms, "then I'll fight with paper too, and sharper edges." 2 days later. Just as I was settling back at Margot's, a knock came at the door. A young woman in a blazer stood outside, badge glinting in the light. "Miss Dane? I'm with Adult Protective Services. We received a report about your well-being. Do you have a few minutes?" I almost laughed at the precision of it. "They locked me out Friday and called the state by Monday." I thought, but I smiled politely. "Of course. Come on in, honey. Coffee's fresh." She sat at the table, clipboard ready, asking questions about my housing, medications, meals. I answered each calmly, showing her my pillbox, grocery list, and legal folder. When she mentioned the report claimed I was forgetful and paranoid about locks, I didn't flinch. "I bet it did," I said evenly. "The ones who changed those locks are the ones who made that call." I slid the folder toward her. "That's the deed. That's my lawyer's card. That's the receipt with somebody else's name where mine used to be. Now tell me, do I sound confused to you?" Her pen slowed. "No, ma'am," she said softly. By the time she left, her tone had shifted from cautious to respectful. "Miss Dane," she said at the door, "I'll be closing this out. There's no evidence you can't manage your affairs." I smiled. "Send me that in writing, will you? I like paper trails." She nodded. "You and me both," when the door shut. I sat for a long moment, my hands pressed flat on the table. They'd tried to paint me unstable, and the state just said otherwise, in ink. My phone rang. Nolan again. "Good news," he said. "The letters are out, and an odd thing Deacon Holloway, the locksmith, called. Said he's got something he needs to tell you about that day." I stared at the window, the winter light bouncing off the glass. "Looks like their tools are starting to talk," I murmured. "If they thought changing that lock was the end of the story, they're about to find out I haven't even turned the key yet." When I walked into Nolan's office that Monday morning, I wasn't there for reassurance. I was there for results. I carried my house evidence folder under one arm, a small notebook in the other, each page marked with dates, times, and names. Nolan was already waiting in the conference room, standing beside a man I hadn't met before. "Miss Dane," he said, "this is Deacon Holloway." Deacon looked to be in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, calloused hands, a man who's worked for every dollar he's made. His eyes told a story before his mouth ever did. Guilt, discomfort, decency. You can tell when a man's lost sleep over something. I thought. He cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, I didn't know what was going on when I changed those locks. Vivica said it was their home now. Wanted it done fast. ASAP while she's out of town." Nolan leaned forward. And her exact words? Deacon nodded slowly, eyes down. She said, "Just erase her from everything. It's simpler that way." For a long moment, nobody spoke. My pulse steadied, instead of spiking. Erase her from everything. Those 5 words hit harder than any insult. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at Nolan and said, "Well then, let's write me back in." Deacon looked relieved when Nolan asked if he'd be willing to sign a statement. "I'll swear to it," he said. And that was it. The missing piece. The line between suspicion and proof. The moment hurt. Turned into purpose, Nolan asked. "Do you want to lock this down legally first, or take your house back in person?" I answered without blinking. "I'm not living out of a suitcase when I still own a front door." We made a plan. Step by step. Nolan would draft a letter confirming my right to occupy and post copies on site. I'd hire my own locksmith and have Deacon present as witness. "No yelling," Nolan reminded me. "Let your paperwork talk." I smiled. They chose sneak and silence. I'm choosing daylight and documentation. I called Deacon later that night to confirm. He said simply, "I'll be there, Miss Dane. You deserve your house." That night, I slept lighter than I had in weeks. This wasn't revenge, it was correction. And morning was coming. Dawn broke cold and bright, the kind of Virginia morning where breath fogs in the air and the world feels clean. Deacon met me at the curb, his truck idling quietly. My locksmith arrived right behind him, toolbox in hand. My knees protested each step, but my stride stayed steady. "This is my address," I told the locksmith, handing him my ID and Nolan's letter. He nodded, no hesitation. The drill buzzed, metal shavings hit the porch, and within minutes the lock clicked open. "Welcome home, Miss Dane," he said. I stepped inside. The air smelled like lavender candles and lemon cleaner, but beneath that, my house. The wood floors still creaked in the same places. The sun still hit the living room wall at the same gentle angle. "Under all that perfume," I whispered, "it still remembers me." Upstairs, I found boxes labeled "Donate," my photo albums stacked by the door, Vivica's clothes hanging in my closet. I didn't shout or curse. I started moving her things outside, folded, zipped, and placed neatly on the lawn. Dresses on hangers, shoes lined in pairs, handbags in a row. "I'm not throwing anybody out," I said to Deacon. "I'm just putting what doesn't belong inside, outside." When the last bag hit the porch, I taped Nolan's letter to the door. Legal owner, Mireille Dane, has re-entered and reclaimed residence. The ink dried just as I heard tires crunching on the driveway. Colby's SUV stopped hard. Vivica jumped out first, hair perfect, voice sharp. "What is this? What are you doing?" I stayed on the porch, hands at my sides. "They're not on the street," I said evenly. "They're on my lawn." Big difference. Colby's voice trembled. "Mom, don't—" I interrupted. "You changed that lock while I was at a funeral. You don't get to mom me today." Auntie Vivica sputtered about abandonment, but I recited dates, phone calls, receipts. "You knew I was coming back," I said. "You just hoped the door wouldn't open when I did." She tried to push past me. I didn't move. "You see that paper?" I pointed to the taped notice. "That's my lawyer talking. This lock? My locksmith. This house. My name." Silence followed, broken only by the sound of Deacon's truck engine idling. Finally, Colby asked, "Where are we supposed to go?" I looked him squarely in the eye. "The same place you expected me to go when you locked me out. You'll figure it out. You're grown." I turned to Vivica. "You changed the locks behind my back. I changed them back to your face. That's the difference between us." Then I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click that echoed louder than any slam. I leaned my back against it, breathing in the quiet air of my own home. "Now," I whispered, "let's see what they do when they can't touch the house and they can't touch my name." The first morning back in my own bed felt strange. Not wrong, just new again. The sunlight slipped through the curtains the same way it always had, but I noticed details I used to take for granted. The soft hum of my old refrigerator, the faint creak in the hallway that let me know the house was still alive. I brewed my coffee, flipped through the mail stacked on the counter, and whispered, "You're home." No dancing, no shouting, just breathing in the silence that used to hurt. Now, heavy with peace, I called the utility company, put the bills back under my name, and replaced every carton of plant milk with what I actually drink. Even walking to the mailbox felt different. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some pretending not to look, others giving half smiles and little waves. In this neighborhood, you don't need to send a memo. You just change a lock, and the news walks itself around the block. Sunday came, and I went back to church. Same parking lot, same steps, same choir robes swaying in rhythm. I didn't go to make a scene. I just wanted to sit in my pew and breathe among people who knew Jack and me long before this mess. Heads turned as I walked in. Sister Cole grabbed my hand, whispering, "We heard, baby. You okay?" I smiled softly. "I'm all right. God and the deed got me." The deacon gave a slow nod, like he already knew. Word had traveled. Of course it had. Vivica and Colby hadn't shown their faces in 2 Sundays. During coffee hour, I caught pieces of quiet talk. "You see that post? She locked her own mama out? That's low." Others murmured about generational lines, young folks defending Vivica's boundaries. Older ones calling it what it was, elder abuse. Nobody said it to my face, but I felt the tide shift. Presence can do what explanation never could. Sometimes all an older woman has to do is stand still and let the truth circle on its own. At the grocery store a few days later, Mrs. Franklin stopped her cart beside mine. "Mireille, I had no idea they did that to you. That's just awful." I smiled faintly. "It's handled now." She nodded quickly. Embarrassed. Reputation travels faster than any sermon. In a town like ours, the weather can turn overnight, and theirs had midweek. Nolan called. "Miss Dane, everything's processed," he said. His letters had been received and logged. The bank froze any attempt to use the property without my written consent. "Their little scheme hit a wall," I replied. He chuckled. "And Deacon Holloway signed the affidavit. The APS report's officially closed. You're cleared and documented as capable. They can't touch you legally or financially." I imagined Colby and Vivica reading that letter. The clean, cold words reminding them the house wasn't theirs to gamble. I didn't need to hear their argument to know how it went. Vivica furious, Colby pacing, reality settling in. They'd built their fantasy on my silence. And now, silence was the one thing they couldn't afford. Nolan asked if I'd meet them for mediation. "If it's in your office." "Maybe," I said. "Anywhere else. Not a chance." He agreed. I could tell he respected that boundary. "They're realizing," he added. "This isn't going away quietly." "Neither am I," I said. That evening, my phone rang. Colby's number. His voice came low, flat. "Hi, Ma." I waited. He stumbled through small talk, my health, the house, the church, then sighed. "I got Nolan's letter." I said nothing. "We handled it wrong," he admitted finally. "Vivica said it would be easier if—" He stopped short. I could almost hear him shaking his head. "The bank called. Something about fraud flags. My credit's frozen." I took a slow breath. "You didn't handle it wrong. Colby, you chose her comfort over my dignity. The papers just caught up to your choices." He swallowed. "Can we fix this without dragging the family name through more mess?" I answered quietly. "The family name got dragged the day you locked your mother out of her own house." Silence. Then a soft, "I'm sorry, Ma," not loud, not sure, but real. When the call ended, I sat at the dining table, spreading out my folder, deed, Nolan's letters, the APS report, Deacon's statement, all neat and square like armor. I didn't want my son shamed. I didn't want my daughter-in-law whispered about, but I wasn't going to live in a world where they believed I wouldn't fight back. Justice doesn't erase betrayal. It just makes the ground level again. The next morning, a letter arrived. Handwritten, my name in Colby's uneven scrawl. The return address, unfamiliar. I held it in my hand for a long while, the paper warm from my touch. I had protected my home with locks and lawyers. What I hadn't decided yet was whether I'd open the door of my heart ever again. The letter sat on my dining table for 2 days before I opened it. The envelope had softened at the edges. My name written in Colby's familiar, heavy-handed print. Every time I passed it, I felt a tug, part memory, part warning. On the third morning, I made a pot of tea, set the cup beside me, and put on my glasses. I wasn't opening it as a mother desperate for her son. I was opening it as a woman deciding if she'd let someone earn a conversation. Inside, his handwriting was uneven. Words crowded like he'd written them fast before courage could fade. He admitted everything. Changing the locks was wrong. Calling APS was worse, he wrote. It wasn't about concern. It was control. He didn't blame Vivica, or stress, or his job. He confessed that the bank flags, Nolan's letters, and the whispers had followed him everywhere. Vivica moved out, Manya, he wrote. And maybe that's justice. He said he'd been trying to make the house his safety net instead of facing his own mistakes. I'm not asking for the house, he ended. I'm asking to look you in the eye and own what I did. I set the pages down and stared out the window. For a long time, I didn't cry, didn't smile, just breathed. It wasn't forgiveness I felt. It was recognition. My son had finally spoken the language I raised him to know, responsibility. A grown child's apology doesn't fix the wound, I said softly. It just tells you they finally see where it came from. 3 days later, we met. My choice of place. A quiet coffee shop off the main road near church, where no one owed either of us sympathy. I arrived early, ordered a small black coffee, and chose a table facing the door. When Colby walked in, I saw a man, not a boy, older, humbled, the kind of tired that comes from carrying your own consequences. Thank you for coming, he said first. I nodded. Let's talk. He spoke in bursts about the refinance attempt, about how he'd told Vivica. Mom will forgive me, she always does. He told me therapy had helped him see how much of his life had been built on avoiding shame. I listened quietly. No interruptions, no rescues. When he finished, I folded my hands. Colby, I said, you get my time, not my keys. You'll never live in my house again, not you, not anyone you marry. You won't handle my money, my mail, or my medical papers. I've already taken care of that. He nodded, eyes damp, but didn't argue. You can visit when invited. You can call when you have something real to say. But the keys are gone. I paused, letting the words settle. I'm not cutting you out of my life. I'm cutting you out of my paperwork. Later that week, I went back to Nolan's office, this time not to defend something, but to define it. The scent of paper and leather felt familiar now, like the closing of a well-read book. He slid a new stack of documents across the table. My will, updated. The house would go not to family, but to the local women's shelter fund, the one that helps older women find a safe place when they've been pushed out of their own. A smaller portion was left for Colby, enough to honor love but not entitlement. Vivica's name was nowhere. Nolan handed me one last sheet, a personal letter I'd asked him to attach to my estate file. It began, "To whoever stands in this house after I'm gone, in it." I wrote that this home was built from hard work and prayer, that once someone tried to erase me from it, and that anyone who lived here next must treat elders with the care I was denied. Nolan called it poetic. I called it insurance on my dignity. They used paper to erase me, I told him. Now I'm using paper to make sure my story outlives theirs. That evening, I sat on my porch at dusk, Afghan across my knees, watching the street glow under the first porch lights. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt earned. Colby calls sometimes. Shorter conversations, but honest ones. Vivica's gone. Her chapter closed elsewhere. I don't need a happy ending. I just need a true one. As the night deepened, I looked toward the street and smiled. Next time someone tries to hand you a smaller life, I whispered to no one in particular, remember this old woman on her porch and ask yourself, are you going to let them hold the key, or are you ready to change the lock? The letter stayed on my desk long after I'd finished reading it, sunlight pooling across its edges. Somewhere beyond the porch, a car slowed, paused, then moved on. I thought I saw a figure at the gate, familiar, hesitant, maybe Colby, maybe someone else. I didn't move. Some doors, I'd learned, opened themselves.